When I pulled up to the lake house that morning for our 4th of July week, my daughter-in-law met me at the foot of the dock, folded her arms and said, "You're not staying, Raymond. You're an embarrassment to this family." I set the cooler down on the boards, looked out at the water I'd swum in for 40 years, and I smiled. "All right," I told her, "enjoy the lake." 8 days later, when they drove back out to meet the buyer and found the locks changed, 3 cameras watching the property, and the deal they'd cooked up already dead in the water, my son called me 53 times before the sun went down. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and I'm glad you're here with me. Stay all the way to the end, my friend, and do an old man a kindness. Tell me in the comments which town you're listening from, so I can see how far this story of mine travels. My name is Raymond Calloway. I'm 71 years old, and for most of my life I thought the worst thing that could happen to a man was losing the people he loved. It turns out the worst thing is letting them convince you that you're the one who's worth less than the things you own. I spent 43 years as a cabinet maker in a little town called Glenmore, up in the hills of western North Carolina. I built kitchens and staircases and church pews and one very fine altar that still stands in the Methodist sanctuary downtown. My hands know wood the way some men know horses. My wife, Eleanor, and I bought 18 acres on Tanager Lake, back when lakefront was something only fools and dreamers wanted. And over a couple of summers I built us a cottage there, board by board, with a porch that faced the sunrise because Eleanor liked to take her coffee out there and watch the mist come off the water. We raised our son Marcus in that house every June and July. Eleanor passed 7 years ago, in the spring, when the dogwoods were out. And after that, the lake became the one place where I could still feel her sitting beside me. Every 4th of July, the whole family gathered there. It was the closest thing we had to a religion. This past spring, I'd had my left hip replaced. The surgery went fine, but recovery at 71 is a slow, humbling business. So my sister Vivian, who lives over in the next county, took me in for 6 weeks so somebody could help me up off the floor if I went down. Bianca, my son's wife, was very kind about it all. She offered to collect my mail and keep it safe. She offered to set up the new phone I'd been meaning to buy, since my old one had finally quit. "Don't you worry about a thing, Raymond," she said. "You just focus on healing. We'll take care of everything." I remember being touched by that. I remember thinking my boy had married a thoughtful woman after all, and that maybe I'd misjudged her these last 6 years. By the end of June, my hip was strong enough to drive, and the only thing in the world I wanted was to be back at the lake for the 4th. I'd spent 2 weeks in Vivian's garage building my granddaughter Lily a little flat-bottomed rowboat, sized just for a 7-year-old, painted yellow with her name on the stern in my best lettering. Lily loved the lake more than any child I'd ever seen. I pictured her face when she saw that boat. I loaded it into the bed of my truck, packed a cooler with the kind of food a man brings when he's going home, and drove the 2 hours back to Tanager Lake, with the windows down and the radio on, happier than I'd been in months. There were already cars in the gravel lot when I got there. Bianca's friends, by the look of them, the kind of people who wear white linen to a lake and never get in the water. I could hear music from the porch. I parked, took the cooler in both arms, and started down toward the dock, calling out a hello. And that's when Bianca came down to meet me. Fast, the way you move when you're trying to head somebody off before they reach the door. She didn't smile. She told me, in a flat voice loud enough for the porch to hear, that the family had talked it over and decided it was best if I didn't stay this year, that I'd had my chance, that after the way I'd behaved last summer, she couldn't have me around her clients, embarrassing everybody. "Behaved how?" I asked. I genuinely didn't know what she meant. She rolled her eyes like I'd proved her point just by asking. "The fire, Raymond. The night you wandered off and the sheriff had to come. You don't even remember it, do you? That's exactly the problem." She said it slowly, the way you'd talk to a child, or a dog. "You're not well. You leave the stove on. You get confused. We can't keep pretending it's fine. Honestly, it's gotten embarrassing for all of us. Now, friend, I want you to understand something. There had been a small fire the summer before, yes. A dish towel got too close to a burner while I was rinsing tomatoes, and it caught, and I had it smothered in a skillet lid inside of 10 seconds, before it so much as scorched the counter. And there had been one morning I'd gone down to the water around 5, before the sun, to tie up Lily's life vest and set the oars so she could fish with me when she woke. Bianca had come out, seen me at the dock in the half-dark, and made a scene about it. I thought it was strange at the time. I understand now that she wasn't worried. She was building something. She'd taken 2 ordinary moments from an old man's life and stitched them into a story about a feeble, dangerous fool who couldn't be trusted near his own house. And she'd been telling that story to everyone she knew. I looked past her, up to the porch, where I could see Marcus standing with a drink in his hand. My son. My only child. The boy I'd taught to swim in that lake, who used to ride on my shoulders into the deep end, shrieking with joy. "Marcus," I said. "Son, what's this about?" He looked at his shoes. He looked at the lake. He looked everywhere but at me. "Maybe it's just better this year, Dad," he said, so quietly I almost couldn't hear it over the music. Bianca's right. You haven't been yourself. That was the part that broke something open in my chest. Not Bianca. I could survive Bianca. It was watching my own son nod along. Watching him decide it was easier to believe a lie about me than to walk down 10 feet of dock and stand at my side. Behind them, across the cove, I could see my neighbor Dottie Pruitt out on her own dock, openly watching, a woman who has never in her life kept a story to herself. By supper time, the whole lake would know that the Calloway boy had turned his daddy away on the 4th of July. I could have argued. I could have raised my voice, demanded answers, made the kind of scene that would have proved every word Bianca had been spreading. Instead, I felt something cold and very calm settle over me, the way the lake goes glassy right before a storm. I picked the cooler back up. I gave Bianca that smile. "All right," I said. "Enjoy the lake." Then I carried Lily's yellow rowboat back to my truck, set it gently in the bed, and drove away from the house I built with my own hands. The house that, the last time I checked, was still mine. For about an hour I drove without knowing where I was going, until I found myself parked outside Vivian's place again, sitting in the driveway with the engine ticking. My sister came out, took one look at my face, and didn't ask a single question. She just put on coffee. That first night I felt nothing but the old familiar ache of not being wanted. The same ache I'd been swallowing for years. Telling myself I was being sensitive, telling myself this was just what getting old felt like. But somewhere around 2 in the morning, lying awake in Vivian's spare room, the ache turned into a question, and the question was sharp enough to sit me up in bed. Why had Bianca been so determined to keep me away from the lake? Not the city, not Vivian's, the lake, the land. Why did it matter so much to her where I slept on the 4th of July? The next morning I asked Vivian for my mail, the mail Bianca had so kindly been keeping safe. Vivian frowned. "Honey, Bianca's had your mail since April. She never dropped any of it by here." I called the post office. A polite young man told me that in May, a change of address and a mail hold authorization had been filed on my account, forwarding everything to a P.O. box in town. I had not filed it. I had been flat on my back recovering from surgery. Someone had filed it for me, using my name. That was the first crack, and once I started pulling at it, the whole thing came apart in my hands. I tried to call my attorney, Patricia Lindquist, who'd handled my affairs and Eleanor's estate for the better part of 30 years. I dialed from Vivian's landline because, as it turned out, my brand new phone, the one Bianca had so helpfully set up for me, had its calls quietly forwarding through a second number I'd never heard of. Patricia answered on the first ring, and when she heard my voice, she let out a breath like she'd been holding it for weeks. "Raymond, thank God. Where have you been? I've called you 4 times. I left messages. I finally sent you a certified letter. Pat," I said slowly. "I never got any calls. I never got any letter. There was a silence on the line, and in that silence I think we both understood, all at once, exactly what kind of thing we were dealing with. "Raymond," she said, "I need you to come to my office. Today. Don't tell anyone you're coming. Bring your driver's license and any property documents you can put your hands on." An hour later I was sitting across from Patricia at her desk, and she was spreading papers out in front of me one at a time, like a doctor showing you an X-ray of a thing growing inside you. The first was a copy of a deed. A gift deed, dated in May, transferring my 18 acres and my cottage on Tanager Lake from me, Raymond Calloway, to a limited liability company called Lakeshore Legacy Holdings. I had never heard of it. I had never signed it. But there at the bottom was my signature, my real signature. The loops and the slant exactly the way I make them. "That's not possible," I said. "I didn't sign this." "How is my name on this?" "It's traced," Patricia said gently. "Whoever did it had a genuine signature of yours to copy, probably off an old document or a check. We'll prove that, but I want you to see the next one first." The next page was a durable power of attorney, also dated in May, also bearing my forged signature, naming Bianca as my agent with full authority over my property and finances in the event of my incapacity. And the last page, The one that made my hands go cold, and still on the arms of the chair, was a purchase agreement. Lakeshore Legacy Holdings had agreed to sell my land to a company called Cordova Development Group for $2,200,000. Cordova builds lakeside resorts. The agreement described, in plain language, the demolition of the existing structure and the construction of 24 luxury condominium units and a marina, my cottage, Eleanor's porch, the dock where I'd taught Lily to bait a hook, all of it scheduled to be bulldozed. There's a closing scheduled, Patricia said. A final walkthrough with the buyer, and then signatures, in 9 days. She paused. Raymond, who is Lakeshore Legacy Holdings? It took me a moment to find my voice. I don't know. But I'd bet my last dollar that if you look at who controls it, you'll find my daughter-in-law. And maybe my son. Patricia made a note. Then she looked at me with great kindness and great seriousness both, the way only an old friend can. I have to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Are you in any kind of mental decline? Are you forgetful, confused, anything like that? Because the whole framework here, the power of attorney, the incapacity language, it only works if she can show that you couldn't manage your own affairs. She's been laying groundwork. I've had 2 calls from people in town this spring asking, very delicately, whether I thought you were still up to handling things. Someone has been telling a story about you. I know exactly who's been telling it, I said. And I am not confused, Pat. For the first time in years, I can see everything perfectly clearly. And it was true. The fire. That wasn't a fire. The dawn. At the dock. The forwarded mail. The forwarded phone. The sudden tender concern. The offers to help. The 18 acres of lakefront that a resort developer would pay over $2 million to flatten. Bianca had not improvised this. She had built it the way I build a cabinet, with patience and a plan, measuring twice before she cut. The only thing she hadn't counted on was that the old man would heal faster than expected, drive himself home, and start asking questions before the glue had set. Patricia wanted to go straight to the sheriff, but I asked her to wait. I'd spent my whole life being careful, being measured, finishing things properly, and I wanted to do this right. First, I said, I want a real signature expert to put it in writing that those are forgeries. Then I want every piece of paper in order before anyone knows I've found a thing. And there's something I have to do at the lake before they get back from the holiday. Patricia smiled for the first time all afternoon. She knew a craftsman when she saw one. By that evening she had arranged for a court-qualified document examiner, a sharp woman named Nadia Okafor, to look at the deed and the power of attorney against a stack of my genuine signatures. The family stayed at the lake through the holiday week, oblivious, drinking on Eleanor's porch. I waited. The day they all caravaned back to the city for work, I drove out to Tanager Lake at first light. And I walked up to my own front door for the first time in 3 months. I'll admit my hand shook a little when I put the key in the lock. Inside, the house smelled like other people's perfume and other people's food. Bianca's clients had left wine rings on the table I'd built for Eleanor. But it was still my house, and the deed in Patricia's office could prove it. I called a locksmith from town, a young fellow named Pete, and had every lock changed before noon. Then I drove to the hardware store and bought 3 weatherproof cameras, the kind that send an alert to your phone when something moves, and Pete's nephew, who couldn't have been more than 19, came out and mounted them for me, one on the drive, one over the front door, one looking down the dock. He showed me, patiently, 3 times, how to watch the feed and how to talk through the little speaker, and I want you to know that I learned it just fine, on the first phone Bianca hadn't tampered with. When the last camera blinked its little red eye to life, I sat down on Eleanor's porch with a cup of coffee and watched the mist lift off the water. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger anymore. Steadiness. The feeling you get when a joint finally fits true. I was not the broken down, confused old fool Bianca had described to half the county. This was my land, bought with my labor and Eleanor's faith. And I was about to remind my family that some things cannot be quietly taken from a man while he sleeps. 2 days later, Nadia Okafor's report came back, and it was everything we needed. She concluded, with the certainty of an expert who'd done this in courtrooms for 20 years, that the signatures on both the gift deed and the power of attorney were not natural signatures at all, but careful tracings, taken from a single source document, reproduced with the telltale tremor and pen lifts of a hand copying rather than writing. Patricia immediately sent formal notice to the title company handling the Cordova sale, and to Cordova's own attorneys, informing them that the seller's title was based on forged instruments, that the true owner had never consented, and that any closing would be void and possibly criminal. Then, we waited for the walkthrough. They came back to the lake on a Saturday morning, all of them, Bianca and Marcus in the lead and two men in pressed shirts behind them, who I took to be the Cordova people, come to admire the property they thought they were buying. My phone buzzed on the kitchen table with the first motion alert. I poured myself a fresh cup and watched the screen as Bianca's key failed in the front door, then in the side door, then in the door to the porch. I watched her step back and look up and see the camera over the door looking right back at her. I watched her face change. The call started a minute later. Marcus first. I let it ring out, then Bianca, then Marcus again. By the fourth call I had counted the cars in the drive and decided I'd let them sweat a while longer, and I'll confess to you, my friend, that there was a part of me, an old and tired and finally awake part of me, that enjoyed watching them pace and shout at a locked door. On the sixth call, I picked up. Morning, Bianca. Raymond, what is going on? None of our keys work. Did you change the locks? Why would you? She caught herself, smoothed her voice into something patient and concerned. Raymond, are you out here? We're worried about you. You're not thinking clearly. Just come open the door, and we'll get you the help you need. Oh, I've already gotten all the help I need, I said. From Patricia Lindquist, and from a very thorough woman named Nadia Okafor, and from the post office, and the title company, and a sheriff's deputy who's on his way out here right now. The line went quiet. I could hear, in the background, one of the Cordova men asking what the holdup was, and Marcus's voice, tight and high, telling him it was just a misunderstanding. I don't know what you think you found, Bianca said finally, and the patience was gone now. But you're confused, Raymond. You're not well. We have documents. You signed everything. I never signed a thing, I said. And I think you know that, because you're the one who traced my name off an old check. Lakeshore Legacy Holdings. Does Cordova know they're buying a deed you forged? Because they do now. Patricia told them yesterday. There's a particular silence a person makes when the ground gives way beneath them, and I heard it then, complete and absolute. Then Marcus took the phone. Dad, he said, and his voice was shaking. Dad, please. What is she talking about? What did you sign? What's Lakeshore? He stopped. I think, in that moment, my son was beginning to understand what his wife had done, and how much of it had been done in his name. Ask her, son, I said quietly. Ask her right now, in front of those men, whether she forged my signature to sell your mother's house. Ask her about the mail she's been stealing since April. Ask her about my phone. And then I hung up, because I'd said what I needed to say, and because the deputy's brown sedan was just then pulling into my drive. Deputy Cole Ramsey was a calm, square-shouldered young man who'd clearly rather have spent his Saturday anywhere else. He'd gotten a call, he said, about a family disturbance, possibly an elderly man in distress who'd locked his family out. I invited him onto Eleanor's porch and handed him a folder. Inside was my deed, the real one, recorded in my name for 43 years. My driver's license, Nadia Okafor's forensic report, Patricia's notice to the title company, and Patricia's cell phone number, in case he had questions about whether I was a danger to myself or simply a man defending his home. He read for a good while. Down in the drive I could see Bianca gesturing furiously at him through the porch screen, and Marcus standing apart now, off to the side, looking like a man watching his own house burn. The Cordova men had already gotten into their car. Deputy Ramsey closed the folder, stepped down off the porch, and spent 10 minutes talking to the people in my driveway. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the postures. When he came back, he took off his hat. Mr. Calloway, this is your property, free and clear, and you've got every right to decide who comes onto it. What I've got down there isn't a welfare situation. Frankly, sir, based on these documents, it looks more like a financial crime situation, and that's a detective's job, not mine. I've advised your family to leave. If they don't, that's trespassing, and I'll handle it. He hesitated, then added, more quietly, for what it's worth, I've seen a lot of this lately. Folks taking from their own parents. You did the right thing calling your lawyer before it was too late. Most don't. That word stayed with me after he'd gone. Lately. Like it was a season. Like it was weather. I learned, in the weeks that followed, that what had happened to me has a name. They call it elder financial abuse, and it doesn't always come from strangers. More often than not, it comes from the people sitting at your own Thanksgiving table, the ones who decide, somewhere along the way, that what you have is worth more to them than who you are. If you're listening to this and any of it sounds familiar, friend, I am asking you plainly, trust the small wrong note when you hear it. The sudden helpfulness. The mail that goes missing. The story about you that you don't recognize. Pick up the phone and call your own lawyer, your own bank, before you ever sign a thing. I almost waited too long. A lot of people do. 3 days after the deputy came, Marcus drove out to the lake alone. I watched him on the camera, sitting in his car in the drive for the better part of 15 minutes before he found the nerve to come up to the porch. He looked terrible, hollowed out. When I opened the door, he didn't try to come in. He just stood there on Eleanor's porch and said, "She's gone, Dad. Bianca. She took what she could and left. The detective called me yesterday." His voice cracked. "I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know about the deed, about any of the forgeries. But you believed her about me," I said. "I had to say it. You believed I was losing my mind. You let her keep me off my own land." He sat down hard on the porch steps and put his face in his hands, and for a long moment he couldn't speak. Then it came out of him in pieces. How Bianca had been telling him for over a year that I was slipping. How she'd shown him a singed dish towel as proof I'd nearly burned the cabin down. How she'd found me confused at the water in the middle of the night. How she'd cried in their kitchen, saying she was scared for me, that I shouldn't be alone, that we needed to think about the future, about what would happen to the property if something happened to me. He told me their finances were a wreck, that a business he'd sunk money into had collapsed and he'd been too ashamed to tell me, and that Bianca had assured him the lake house was the answer, that I'd be better off in a nice place in town, that it was practical, that it was even kind. "She made it sound like we were taking care of you," he said. "She made it sound like the loving thing." He looked up at me, and he was 38 years old, and he was 6 years old, all at once. How could I have been so stupid? "You're my father." I sat down beside him on the steps, the way I used to when he was small and the world had wounded him in some way that felt enormous. "Because she's very good at it," I said, "and because it's easier to believe a comfortable lie than an uncomfortable truth, and that's a weakness in all of us, son, not just you." I let him cry. And then, because I am his father, and that does not stop being true no matter what a man does, I forgave him. Not because what he'd done didn't hurt. It hurt more than I have words for. But because he had driven out here alone to face me with the truth instead of hiding from it. And a man who does that has already started to find his way back. That was a year ago, near about. Bianca's forgeries are a matter of public record now. The state revoked her real estate license, and there's a criminal case grinding along that Patricia tells me will not go well for her. Lakeshore Legacy Holdings was dissolved. Cordova went and bought somebody else's lake, somewhere else. And I wish that family the same luck I wish my own. Marcus and Bianca's divorce was finalized in the spring. It was hard on him, and it was harder on Lily, who's 8 now, and asks fewer questions about her mother than you'd expect, which I think tells you most of what you'd want to know. Here is the part I'd most like you to hear. This past spring, I took my woodworking tools out of storage and spent 2 months turning the old boathouse on the property into a snug little cottage, with its own door and its own kitchen, and a window that faces the morning water, just like Eleanor's porch. Marcus and Lily live there now. He found steady work at a mill in town, honest work, and in the evenings he comes up to the big house and we sit on the porch, and don't always need to talk. We're learning each other again as the men we are now, not the men a liar told us we were. This morning I was at my workbench in the shop when I heard small, fast feet on the gravel, and Lily came flying in, still in her pajamas, asking if today was finally the day. It was. I'd finished sanding the last seat. Together we carried her yellow rowboat down to the dock, the one I built in Vivian's garage while my hip was knitting back together, with her name lettered on the stern in my steadiest hand. I held the rope while she climbed in, and I taught her how to set the oars true, how to pull even on both sides so the boat runs straight instead of in circles, the same thing my own father taught me on this very water more than 60 years ago. "Grandpa," she asked, squinting up at me in the early light, "is Daddy gonna come fish with us?" "I sure hope so, sweetheart," I said. "Go on and ask him. Last summer, my friend, I thought I was a burden. I thought I was an old, used-up thing, an embarrassment to be hidden away, a problem to be managed, and eventually sold off along with the land. They told me that so many times, in so many quiet ways, that I'd very nearly come to believe it myself. But sitting on that dock this morning, watching my granddaughter learn to pull a true line across the water her grandmother loved, I understood at last that they'd had it exactly backwards. I was never the burden, I was the keel. I was the long plain piece down at the bottom that nobody sees and nobody thanks, the one that keeps the whole boat from rolling over in rough water. Bianca tried to pull me out of this family to sell what was underneath me, and instead she capsized only herself, and the rest of us, the ones who matter. We righted ourselves and sailed on. So now I'd like to hear from you, the ones who've stayed with me all the way to the end. What would you have done if it had been your home, your name traced onto a stranger's deed, your own child looking away? Have you watched something like this happen to someone you love? Tell me in the comments. And before you go, look at the 2 stories I've left for you on the screen here at the end. They're favorites of mine, and I think they'll surprise you. Thank you for sitting with this old man a while. It means more than you know. If someone makes you feel like a burden, look again at who depends on the quiet strength you've stopped noticing in yourself. Trust the small wrong note, ask the hard question early, and never let anyone convince you that your worth is measured in what you own. The people who truly love you don't want your house. They want you at the table. Please note, this story was created and fictionalized by AI to bring you a little entertainment, while also carrying a heartfelt reminder to cherish the ones who hold our lives together.